Thank you, everyone, for attending the latest edition of Coffee and Croissant. I'm hoping that soon or soon-ish, we are going to be able to come back into person and actually have some coffee and some croissants. But until then, Zoom is providing us with a platform to do this, which is wonderful. So as you know, our big push this half term is going to be on live marketing and feedback. And we are continuing with that theme. So last week's session, we looked at live marketing, really using English as a model subject of how things can be done. And what we're going to do over the next few weeks is change that around. So looking in different department areas, looking at the variation of what the expectation is for really good live marketing and really good feedback. And today we are looking at science and maths. And we have some amazing experts for you here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the one and only Kausu. Dun, dun, dun.
Right, guys, see what we have to put up with in Coffee and Croissant. You're lucky you're missing it and you're doing it virtually. Right, so I'm going to start by talking you through why we live mark. I'm hoping that I'm preaching to the converted already. Obviously, live marking is about measuring students' progress and seeing how students are doing with the work or the tasks that you have asked them to complete in order to secure their learning with regards to KOs. It's about student engagement. I personally think the student engagement one is really important because it's good for students to know that there is a bit of a dialogue, an actual dialogue with their teacher, as opposed to them just sitting there and getting some type of retrospective marking later. Instant feedback and gratification. Challenging misconceptions straight away. So personally, as a maths teacher, I find it much easier to see what's going wrong as students are doing it and then fix it there and then if I need to, and intervening with the whole class. Obviously, it's about assessment for learning. It helps students with their revision. It also allows parents and carers to track and monitor their progress. So it's very clear in their books or their portfolios, depending on the subject that you are doing, what the students have been doing in order to make the required progress or lack of progress in some cases. There's a learning conversation and there's dialogue. It's really important for our students to know exactly where they're going wrong and to have that conversation with their teacher. I also think it's quite comforting for students who may not necessarily be performing as they should to be able to have that conversation face to face rather than see it in their book in a red pen 2 or 3 weeks later. And getting to know your students. The only way you'll get to know your students and how they're doing is if you actually have a conversation with them. And obviously live marking really, really helps support that. I'm going to run you through some of the ways in which we live mark in maths. Obviously, last week you looked at English, I believe, and Sad will be talking about science. I would say what's unique about maths is that we don't use target codes like many subjects do, because our skill or our knowledge that we are testing every lesson changes. So it's quite difficult to have generic target codes, I would say, in our subjects. So if I talk you through how we do it. So we try to stay away from tick and flick and have a more diagnostic approach. So looking at what students have done, the calculations, and whether they have kind of followed the methods that we've asked them to follow, and seeing where the misconceptions are. If there is a particular issue, you are likely to see some type of prompt. Sometimes it could be just a simple fix, because obviously there's been some type of verbal dialogue with the student before something's gone in their book. Or it could be, for example, like I've written here, percentage, because the student hadn't put it in the right form. So it just depends on what particular need that student has, and that comes from the diagnosis from the live marking. But we're moving away from tick and flick because that's not really feedback, that's just ticking and flicking. The other way in which you may see live marking in a maths book is that quite often for our SAS students, we have I guess setted classes. People tend to be in pathway classes, but there will still be students in there who may struggle to access the work as it's provided. So quite often you'll see some form of scaffolding. Obviously there's been some verbal dialogue with the student, but then the teacher has scaffolded the problem for them. You can see here it's much more like fill in the gap, and obviously the students then followed it and it's been rechecked. The biggest thing for us, which I think makes the kind of the impact in terms of progress, is that we have to check and check again, because sometimes students, even after the first piece of dialogue, might not get it right. So you can see here that the teacher has checked their work, given them a prompt, and tried to support them to get to the right place, check their work again and realize that they've used the wrong numerator, because while they've got the denominator correct, they haven't corrected the numerator, and then made them redo it and checked it again. That check and check again is probably the most important part to really pushing them on, rather than just giving them feedback in red, expecting them to do it and then never really finding out whether they've done it or not. I'm now going to pass over to Saj, who will talk about how science live mark, and I will probably be back in a moment. Sajid, when you come.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Kalsu. So for science, it's quite similar in terms of maths. What we do is we try and vary our language. So when we're looking through work, we try and extend them a little bit. So for example, we've got in our first one here, okay, we've got an explain style question. So the question pushes them forward into a particular topic. In this one, it's to do with isotopes. And just like Kalsin was saying in maths, we check it again. So for example, in this one, the answer wasn't brilliant. It was partly correct. And the teacher here has put a prompt and just got them to give that extra nudge just to get a perfect answer. In the second one, we've got a slightly different one. Instead of an explain, okay, depending on the setting, depending on the type of student you've got, you may use a describe. So the first one would most probably be a top set. The second one would most probably be a middle or an SAF student. And here we've got describe. And in this one, it's quite good because in this one, they've given them how many marks this type of question would be. So the first one is describe the structure, and then they've moved them on with an explain. And again, there is checking, the work's being checked, and they've given them a little nudge to how they can improve. And just for an example of the third piece of work, we're not quite happy with the response that the person has given, okay? So we use feedback like this just to ensure that their answers are formed correctly. And they've given them a little nudge in terms of most probably the first time they haven't done it. So there's an arrow just to ensure that they've done it again properly. So quick wins in science that we use, okay, is the following. When we're giving feedback, the targets that we give, we ensure that we vary the feedback language according to the class that you've got. So if you've got a high set, we ensure that the language is appropriate. If we've got a lower pathway, C and D or S, then we ensure that the language is appropriate. Okay, we use Bloom's taxonomy to differentiate our feedback for the different pathways. So we use, for example, explain, justify for our higher abilities. We would use describe, draw, and label for our middle to low abilities. We use prompts. So like Kalsoon says, you need to check and check again. Okay, and if it's not 100% correct, then we will use prompts when needed. And that could be with keywords, it could be sentence starters, or it could be a diagram that's partly drawn. And I'll leave this bit to Kalsoon.
Right. So in terms of live marking strategies, I'll be really honest, before I arrived at Cumberland, I'd never worked in a school where there was live marking. It was always retrospective. So it took me some time to kind of get myself into a routine so that I could live mark and get through my entire class now. Some of the things that I've kind of looked at and thought might work for people who are trying to get themselves into that routine, because it's very much what I've tried along the way, is a row by row system where teachers can keep track of any students who are absent. That's quite useful because once students get into that routine, they know exactly what's expected in terms of who's going to go next. Have a marking rota so you can keep track. I definitely do this like quite a lot because I've got a terrible memory, first of all, and secondly, it helps me keep track. I always start with my SAF students. So for those of you that don't know what SAF is, obviously your SAF students are the students in your class you are particularly targeting. And in order to do that, obviously the S, A and F tell you what it stands for. So you seat them in a particular place, probably closer to the teacher's desk in most cases. You ask them questions and you give them feedback. So in my lessons, I always start with the SAF students because I already know that they will likely be the students that I need to support the most. That's not always the case, but I always do start with them and they kind of know that routine. I've actually moved away from doing a row by row system recently, and I've found that it's very useful for me to do my live marking in conjunction with DPR. So I will put the DPR window up on the board and project it, and I ask students to come up to the front, usually in a register order, but sometimes I try to catch them off guard and go for the middle of the register. And I update the KOs as I go along, depending on what I see in their books. And that allows students to be kind of very clearly know what is happening with regards to their progress. And it also allows me to keep track of who needs to come back and who needs to have their work live marked. So there's some practical things I thought were necessary to let you guys know, because obviously sometimes when you just start live marking, it can be a bit difficult to get into the routine. Pass back to the ideas.
Chair swapping. Thanks, Kelsey. Right, guys, so we're just going to have a few takeaway messages for you. I'm not going to read through all of them, okay? But what we need to make sure is that our feedback leads towards an end goal, okay? So you need to bear in mind, where do you want your students to go with this piece of work, and that your feedback takes them to that, okay? The feedback should be clear and concise, okay? And it should allow those students to be able to actually work on it. The feedback shouldn't be so using language that's inappropriate or a target feedback that they can't complete, okay? It should be something that they can actually action then and there, right? And obviously we do live feedback. So with live feedback, it should be timely and it should be ongoing. And the thing that we want is we want to ensure that it's consistent. Okay, it needs to be an accurate and trustworthy way that we can action what the students are doing and give us that quick win. And that concludes our coffee and croissant. I'll give it back to Scott.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Saj. Thank you, Kalsoom. Some lots of really useful tips and tricks there. And I think that this takeaway screen that we've got here is really useful. And what we want to make very clear as a school is that in different departments, you have a different emphasis on the way that you live mark. But within that, there are some core principles that all of us use. And one of the things that I have been working on over the last week and have sent out to HODs and post holders in departments now is really getting a framework and making it very clear to every person in each department what the methods and the expectations are for you. So that is going to be presented to you. It's being completed by the HODs at the moment. It's going to be presented to you in the next department meeting. And then using that framework, you're going to have a really in-depth book look to find out exactly where we are based on the principles that you and your department know work for you. But those things that cross all of those boundaries, right? We want this instant live feedback to be there because we know it is what produces the best progress for our kids. Retrospective marking is so yesterday. We don't want to do it anymore, right? It takes up too much time. It adds no value. So we're trying our best to streamline this to make it as time effective and maximize progress as much as we can. So, you know, I'm always looking for hints, tips, things that you do in your lessons that are also brilliant, but you've kept to yourself because you didn't know everyone wants to know about them. Trust me, everyone wants to know about them, right? We all have things that we're brilliant at. So please drop me an email. Let me know if you've got any ideas that you want us to bring to this. Next week, we're going to be looking at MAS in particular and how we can use live marking and focus that with our MAS pupils. But before that, we have got an amazing 3-day weekend coming up. So I hope that everyone has an amazing bank holiday weekend. Thank you so much for attending this session. And I will see you on Tuesday next week, not Monday. Stay in bed, have a lay-in. Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.